What's going on, gang? And welcome back to another episode of Scared of Normal. It's Mike, and today I'm joined by Sean and James, and we're sitting down with the legendary Lenoski, aka Trail Boss. Thanks for coming out, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really exciting to actually have you here. And when we started this project, actually, you're on the top of one of my lists to like hit up and get on. And like I saw you were in town on Instagram the other day, and like I was immediately texted you. So that was yesterday, so it worked out pretty quick.
I gotta say, it was pretty awesome because I've watched some of the podcasts that you post, and I've thought it would be awesome to be on there, but it's not the kind of thing you want to ask to be on.
Totally.
So, it was a nice text yesterday.
Hell yeah. Well, yeah, I'm excited to get into this one. For the people who don't know who you are, can you give them a little brief rundown of who is Lenoski?
Ooh. I've been mountain biking a really, really long time. Probably started riding mountain bikes pretty close when they were invented, probably 30, 35 years ago. But I've been riding professionally over 25 years. So
wow.
It's been a long time.
A quarter of a century of professional bike riding.
Yeah, so I started out at riding BMX and skateboards on the East Coast and was 6'4", so kind of got out of BMX only because I was too tall to even fit on those bikes. And I was bummed because BMX was always my favorite sport.
Sure.
Skateboarding a close second for sure. And I figured there was no height limit on that. So skateboarded for a long time, and then mountain bikes started to get popular. So this was like 88, something like that. And I just thought it was a big BMX bike. So got a mountain bike, and for me it seemed more natural to try to imitate the stuff I was doing on my skateboard, you know, ollieing, so bunny hopping over stuff, acid drop, just ride off stuff on my mountain bike. So I would go for, you know, I was working in a bike shop at the time, so I'd go for the cross-country rides or whatever, and I'd play on the park, you know, the picnic tables in the parking lot and goof around on logs and stuff like that more than trying to go for distance.
I love it.
Kind of got into the sport that way.
Totally. So when you were doing that, like in your area, I can't imagine a lot of people were riding bikes that way.
Believe it or not, you know, a lot of people ask me why I always lived in New Jersey.
Okay.
Not a lot of professional mountain bike riders from New Jersey, but mountain bike trials started basically for kids when they couldn't ride motorcycles. So motorcycle trials was really popular in Pennsylvania and New York State. So then I guess by default, mountain bike trials was really popular, and we have really technical terrain. You know, you can't ride more than 5 feet without a rock or a log or roots or whatever.
Sure.
So it was very conducive to trials.
Huh.
So when I got into it, it was a good scene. And then, you know, just different circumstances, it just made sense to stay there as a professional rider.
Yeah. That was actually one of the questions I had that was going to come a little later was, you know, how did you get into trials? Because it's like not like super widely accessible or like presented in American culture, really. You know, like you don't see that around too much. So that's kind of cool to hear that little backstory.
Yeah, my first exposure to it was BMX magazines. Like every now and then you'd see Kevin Norton, because Haro made a little push with a trials bike for a minute.
Okay.
GT. So once in a while you'd see somebody riding over a pallet on a weird 20-inch bike, and I always thought it was cool. But then I saw a &Ray video of him on a mountain bike, and then that's when I realized like, oh, I could fit on that thing.
Oh, that's sick.
And what year is this around that you're getting into trials?
Probably about 88, like junior year of high school or senior year of high school. So long time ago.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a bummer that they didn't have the 22-inch BMX bikes when you were starting, because those have been really cool. I've always wanted one. Yeah. But yeah, it's cool to see you get into the mountain biking.
A little more approachable for people who are over 6 foot tall for sure.
Yeah. So the biggest thing, or the closest thing that I was able to do, there was a S&M Holmes back in the day, and it was like the first really long BMX bike. I had that, I think, freshman year of college. I used to ride around on a Holmes, but still had 20-inch wheels. So.
I didn't even think about the simple fact that like just in the last like 15 years, BMX bikes have kind of gotten a little longer and like a little more approachable for tall people. I didn't even think about that. Like back then, like top tubes were pretty short, you know?
It's
like,
crazy when you look at the retro bikes now. Like my friend had an old Diamondback they just refurbished. They're so tiny.
Dude, they're insanely small.
Compared to today's
It's like
standards.
a 19-inch top tube. Like the standard top tube today is like 21 inches. So that's kind of wild.
Going back to you with the trials up in the Northeast, where did you get a lot of your inspiration from? So you mentioned a 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙈 video. Was that something that like always the group of guys you were riding with strong enough riders that you were all pushing each other and progressing just in your own circle? Because we didn't have the internet back then, right?
Yeah, there was no internet. It was basically when I was into freestyle. it was basically like get a new issue of BMX Plus or Ride or whatever, and see if you could try to do all the tricks before the next issue came out or something like that. For trials, there wasn't a lot of coverage at all. So it was basically I would go to competitions and watch the experts, pros at the time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then when everybody would leave, then I would try to do all the courses.
No
that's
kidding.
cool.
And I started to be able to do them inconsistently fairly early on because I rode BMX. And trials wasn't quite as popular. So the riding wasn't super advanced. Like a pro trials course was still like a hard trail back then, like a hard section of trail.
Right.
So I would go to the events because there was a lot of trials events on the East Coast, usually in conjunction with cross country races. Like you'd race cross country, and then while they're tabulating results, people would just mess around and do a trials.
I love that era of bike events. Like I think about like the DK Dirt Classic race event that used to happen for BMX racing.
Yeah,
and they would like all the pros would race, and then at the end of it, they would be like riding the dirt jump contest in the middle. Same kind of thing where it's like there was some seriousness, but some fun involved too.
Totally. And one of the biggest events for mountain bike trials back in the day was at this cross country race at Camelback. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Camelback ski resort on the East Coast. And you used to do like a 2-mile descent to start your cross country loop. So that was like one of the early cross country races I could do well in because I was always so big. Like I'm not a climber.
Right.
But I could open a little gap on the downhill and then, maybe win sport,
Oh, that's awesome.
18 sport class or something like that. So yeah, I would just go watch people do it and then try to imitate it.
Yeah, so there was a big enough community there to keep progressing that.
Yeah.
When did you start, like, kind of taking it serious? Like, oh, maybe there's something in this. I'm not just pissing around with my buddies.
So I got my first mountain bike senior year high school. I went to college, and I went to college on the East Coast at a place that's a really, really popular mountain bike place now, Glen Park. They always have an ESC, or they've had EWS qualifiers there. It wasn't anything like that when I was going there. It was much, much less developed trail system, but being on a college campus on my mountain bike ride and trials, like I would just ride around campus all the time, stairs, ledges, all that kind of stuff. And I guess by maybe sophomore year, I started to get pretty decent at it. And growing up, like being into BMX and freestyle, like I always dreamt, like, man, that would be the coolest thing ever. I'd go to different summer tours. GT would come to town. You'd watch Eddie Fuel or Ron Wilkerson or
that's so
all
sick.
These old school guys. And like, I would just dream of being a professional bike rider. And like, I just remembered how it affected me as a kid. Like that made your whole year just watching those guys. So probably by junior year of college, I started to get pretty good and started like thinking it would be a cool job, but not super realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And then my senior year of college, I went to the national championship in Traverse City, and Traverse City doesn't have a lot of natural terrain. So basically all the trials courses were urban style, getting up and over cars and big wire spools and things like that.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
And with my BMX background, I was really good at bunny hopping or like the bigger stuff. Wasn't quite as good at technical stuff back then, but I could bunny hop pretty much better than anybody or do gaps and stuff like that. So I actually won. And Hans got first, I got second, but I was first American, so I was national champ.
Yeah.
And like totally surprised myself. So then I was getting ready to graduate college, and I just won that event, and I was like, holy shit, this could actually, be something that I could do. And I went to college for sports marketing, so I would just send out Xerox resumes all day long, like literally mail handfuls of resumes to every single bike company with like all these little slogans.
That's sick. It's crazy to think about that, even just like the fact that you had to like mail them, right?
Yeah, you'd have to I'd like have a photo, I'd take a Xerox, maybe Xerox it like 2 or 3 times so it looks pixelated, cut it out with scissors, tape it on another one.
Oh my god.
Put it on the scanner or copy machine.
Yep.
The funny part is then I graduated, so that's when I was in full-blown trying to get sponsored mode. So I had a full-time job, but sometimes I would do those resumes like during work, and then I'd leave them leave them on the copy machine.
Oh no.
And then the owner would be like, "You left this on the
What were you doing for work at the time?
In college, I was working in a machine shop.
Okay.
So just doing like basic machine stuff, some lathe work and stuff like that. When I graduated, they offered me a job doing production engineering. So it was a plastics manufacturer, and I was like the 22-year-old fresh out of college kid that would walk around with a clipboard and try to get people to make the machines run efficiently.
Yeah.
So everybody hated me, I'm sure.
The number cruncher.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They're like, here comes the asshole again.
Oh,
trying
that's
to make,
funny.
we got to get 10 parts out this hour, not 9,
So going back to you Xeroxing your resumes,
Yeah.
I saw that EWR was your first real sponsor. Is that correct?
My first sponsor was EWR, 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙀𝘿.
Yeah.
My first sponsorship was he sold me a frame at like a discount that he threaded the bottom bracket opposite.
Oh.
But it was like, half price or something. So that was my first sponsor, and that's what I won that national championship on, was an EWR.
Yeah, and it's a Pennsylvania-based company.
Yeah.
It was like steel frames, right?
Yeah, it was a steel frame out of Pennsylvania, similar to, a much smaller Reeb back in the day.
That's super cool.
Handmade in Pennsylvania. And it was really cool. Yeah, that was the bike that I won that championship on.
How was it signing that first contract? It probably wasn't a contract, but just that first sponsor. Was that like a turning point in being like, I could do this? Or, because I know when I got like my first kind of real thing, I was just like, like maybe this is like a viable thing. So
it was always weird because with mountain bike trials, there was no clear path. There was nobody sponsored for it other than Hans. Like Hans was the only person. So in racing, there's a more traditional path. Like if you win and you're on the podium, companies see that and they're like, we need somebody on the podium.
Yeah.
Because it's on Mountain Bike Action or whatever magazine it was. Like you win a race, you get coverage, you get sponsored. With trials, it wouldn't ever get covered. So I think it was growing up, going to those freestyle shows and like thinking how that resonated with me as a kid, like that impacted everything. And I started thinking like, competition trials is awesome, but like the demos is probably where it's at. And Hans would go around and do demos, but he never had like a portable truck and trailer with like a demo system.
Sure.
So I kind of dreamt that up, and I had a handful of other sponsors, but the first big one was 𝙎𝘾. I pitched 𝙎𝘾 on it, and I rode for 𝙎𝘾 just on a grassroots deal at first. And then 6 months into it, they offered me a $500 a month retainer. So then I just kept working my job for the next 6 months, and everything went so well that then there was like a good jump off point. I was always pretty conservative. Like I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, never like dirtbagged it and like just didn't work. I was always like making sure there was some kind of backup plan.
Yeah.
So, and the story with 𝙎𝘾 is kind of interesting too, because back then, I guess it was maybe 95, Trek was like the shit. Trek had their like Rocket Boy bikes and all this stuff. Travis Brown was racing. They had this cool downhill bike. They were just getting into carbon, and I was sending resumes to everybody, like anybody I could possibly send a resume to, and cold calling, try and explain what you do, and nobody would know what trials is. Nobody had any idea who I was, so you're just trying to get somebody on the phone. And I spoke to somebody at 𝙎𝘾 at the time, but obviously it didn't go anywhere. So I talked to somebody at Trek, which actually then worked for Giant years and years later. And it's funny because he'd be like, man, you were so persistent. You would call us and browbeat us every day.
Oh, that's rad.
It's just funny, like hearing that perspective so many years later.
Yeah, from like inside the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I totally could see it. Like I was probably so annoying.
Totally.
I'm Jeff and I could do these tricks and whatever.
Just listen to me.
Yeah. So I was racing downhill at the time. And one of my things was I would cut up my Xerox resumes, and my tagline at the bottom was faster than a speeding bullet, able to hop boulders in a single bound, because I was racing downhill in trials.
I love that.
I was obviously better at trials, but locally I did pretty decent in downhill. So Trek offered me a sponsorship. It was going to be this Y bike that they had, this carbon fiber bike.
I remember that. Yeah.
Super high failure rate, so probably best I didn't take it.
Yep.
A Y bike and a carbon bike, just a frame, to ride trials. And I was like so psyched, because that was like the coolest brand back then.
Yeah.
It was just a grassroots deal. It wasn't like on their team or anything like that. So I went to the bike shop that I was working at, and they didn't sell Trek. So I was like, you're not even going to believe it. I got sponsored by Trek. I'm so psyched. And they were like, "What? Have you ever considered riding for 𝙎𝘾?" And I was like, I don't want to ride for 𝙎𝘾. I want to ride for Trek. Trek is awesome. And they're like, well, could we make a phone call for you? So I was like, you can try, but I'm riding for Trek. So now, having a much better understanding of how the business works, they called 𝙎𝘾, and 𝙎𝘾 came back and offered me 2 complete bikes. So then in a matter of minutes, I was like, screw track, I'm riding for Schwinn. 2 complete bikes. That's awesome.
Yeah.
This deal is way better. Was Schwinn still in Boulder at this point in time? Do you remember?
Schwinn was still in Boulder.
Okay.
And Schwinn wasn't cool yet, but in the mid 90s, Schwinn was the shit. Like around, like before they bought Yeti, all that. I had no idea what was about to come. It was only because it was 2 bikes. That's the only reason I rode for Schwinn. And so I think May rolls around. There's this big bike tour in New York City called the 5-Borough Bike Tour. I think Schwinn used to sponsor it then because, they're such a big brand. They would just sponsor all these huge events. So just right time, place. The bike shop was having a sale. I offered to do a little trials demo for it as a thank you for getting me hooked up with Schwinn. The guys from Schwinn were in New York for the 5-Borough Bike Tour, so they came to their big dealer just to support them, and they watched me ride, and they're like, oh, I guess like he probably is worth the frames. They probably only gave it because they're such a big dealer. They're just hooking up their dealer.
Yeah.
But then I guess they saw that like I was actually pretty decent. So they're like, hey, can we put you in touch with our PR agency? And I was like, sure. I lived in New Jersey, so this was one of the reasons why early on living on the East Coast worked. Back then, Schwinn was such an iconic brand, and it was turning their 100-year anniversary. So Schwinn was like such a good news story. Mountain biking was big, and then they had somebody that could go into a studio and like hop around and do something right on set. With all those morning shows were big back then.
Yep.
So the first show I ever did was on FX before it was it used to be like a news channel early on, with Tom Bergeron from, I think he's Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah,
whatever.
I'm pretty
He's
sure. Yeah,
pretty big.
Damn,
TV
that's
host.
crazy.
But I went in and did this little, thing, talked about Schwinn real quick and did some tricks, and it went really well. So a couple weeks later, they're like, I was still working my full-time job. So like, hey, can you do the Today Show next week? And I was like, sure. Having no idea that's like millions of people watching. So I was too dumb to even be nervous, So I go to Times Square and I was on the Today Show, and everybody's like, oh shit, I can't believe you're on the Today Show. I was like, I guess that is kind of cool.
You saw that? Yeah.
And then a few weeks later, they're like, hey, Regis and Kathy Lee are doing a live remote from Central Park. Can you do that?
Oh my god.
And I was like, sure. So hopped over Regis, filmed it on my bike, and did all this stuff because it was Schwinn's 100th year anniversary, So obviously, like, you needed to be able to perform, but if I rode for Trek, that path would have been completely different.
Dang, that's so crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was all while I was doing it for free for Schwinn.
Yeah.
Then after those few things went okay, then they offered me $500 a month, and I was like, sure, I'll just keep working. And it was weird. I'd be like, can I have off Tuesday to do the Today Show? And like there'd be rabbit ears, like people at work. This is how long ago it was. Like people would bring a TV into work and like watch.
They're like, damn, that kid with the clipboard is he's on the TV. What's going on here?
Were they pretty supportive of that? Like, were they open to you? Like, I'm sure it wasn't every week, but like,
they were actually pretty flexible about it. Yeah,
Nice.
they were. It was a middle-sized company, family-owned, so they were pretty supportive of it. That was the huge turning point for my parents. Like, and now that I'm a parent, I totally get like looking out for your kids and everything. But like when I was graduating college and I said I wanted to ride bikes for a living, you could just hear it's like a balloon deflating. Like they were not stoked on me wanting to be a professional bike rider. But then when their friends are like, oh my God, you must be so proud of Jeff. He's on the Today Show. Then like when my parents had the affirmation from their friends, they're like, I guess this is kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure back then too, like, that's a hard path to see anybody taking. Even probably being like a professional athlete is like a hard path as a parent to see. Like somebody that's, playing basketball. That's a hard thing to believe that's possible. Today it's a little more easy to wrap your brain around it because like you can see that path a little more clearly. But then I'm sure they were probably just like, what is our kid doing, man?
100%. And even like, so my son played lacrosse in high school, and when he was playing, he'd be like, I want to be a professional lacrosse player. And I'd find myself like, can't be a professional lacrosse player. And then you're like, wait a second. 25 years ago, you can't be a professional trials rider.
Totally.
Or my daughter did cheer, and she wants to do something in the cheer industry. And I'd think like, that's not a sport. And then you go to these events and you're like, this is 10 times better than bike riding.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, the money that's involved, like everything that's involved with those sports. But yeah, as a parent, I'm sure you're sitting there and you're just like, go the conservative route. Like it's a lot safer to go get a job.
You got the job, don't leave the job.
Yep.
So those first 6 months or whatever with Schwinn went pretty good. So they offered me that money, $500 a month. So I was just living at home, working my job, and it was $500 extra to do stuff. And then at the end of the year, then that's when I finally approached them with like, hey, I could do a lot more if I didn't have to go to this job every day.
Hell yeah.
And they offered me basically like half of what I was making at my job. And then I started doing some demos and, made a bunch of money doing that, and ended up thinking, if I did it for a year or two, at least I wasn't working in sports management anyway. So I figured even if I do it for a year or two, like, it'll be worth it. And now 25 years later, it's kind of in ride or die now.
Still worth it, huh?
Yeah.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, it's cool to like hear that like progression, and like, it's always interesting for me too to like hear people's stories about like when they are like on the brink of going professional, because like, there is the stories of the people dirtbagging it, and then there's people that also have like the plan B, like kind of what you had. And I think it's really cool to hear that, and like for people listening too that are like kind of scared to take that jump. It's like, dude, you were working hard during the day and then taking time off, or like riding your bike at night or whatever to like make the dream come true. So that's really freaking rad.
Yeah. And I'd like to say that it was marketing genius, but it was a lot of luck. Like, riding trials and riding for Schwinn was a perfect formula, because I could do any event and anybody knew Schwinn back then.
For sure.
Whereas like a racing brand, it's probably a lot different, but
a little more niche that way. Because like Schwinn is were they one of the first bicycle manufacturers, like big time bicycle manufacturers?
Yeah, like at that time they were the largest bike manufacturer and had the best brand name recognition. So I could tell like my parents or my grandparents, or like Schwinn, anybody knew Schwinn.
Yeah, they were like pop culture, right? Like that was a big part of American culture. So
did you have like, just knowing the way the industry works and everything, those steps that you took and approaching Schwinn after that 6 months, did you have any kind of like mentors or anything that were already, I know that you kind of like paved the way in that kind of aspect, but was there like a Hans or anybody like that you went to and was like, hey, grabbing advice, or was this just you're smart enough to look ahead like that?
Yeah, so that first year on Schwinn was the first year that they had the Extreme Games. It wasn't even X Games yet. It was Extreme Games.
I remember that.
And they had a trials event at Mount Snow.
No way.
And so 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙀𝘿 had come on the scene, who was a trials rider for Cannondale. He was awesome. Hans was on the scene, and all the U.S. guys. And we went to Mount Snow, and I ended up rooming with Hans. So I was still working full time, and I gave him my whole spiel and like how I wanted to try to make a career, and he gave me a pretty good pep talk.
Yeah,
it's funny. I just saw him in Bentonville. I see him all the time, but we were a little tipsy in Bentonville, and he was recounting his version of the story, and like 25 years later how it actually worked. But the Extreme Games was pretty cool. It was the first year they ever had it. It was televised, but it was probably one of my most monumental failures ever, because back then, like I said, I was kind of inconsistent. I could do some things really well and other things not. And Hans and 𝙎𝘶 were definitely heads and tails above everybody. And then there was another guy in the U.S., Mark Brooks, who was like literally 15-time national champion, whatever. He was very good at technical riding, but he wasn't a big move rider. So at the X Games, they had 5 courses. You do 3 different loops. So basically you ride 15 times. And if you fuck up a course, it's 5. You get 5 points. Every time you put a foot down, it's a point. The maximum you get is 5. So
like low points wins, correct?
Low points wins.
Okay.
Yeah. So we finished the first round. I was in first place. And I was like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm like first place in X Games. Then I started to get into my head. And after the second round, I started choking a little bit.
Oh,
and
no.
I think I was maybe in like second or something. And then we had, and it's not like a ton of points. Like maybe the first round I might have finished with like 5 points or 3 points or something. And then the second round did pretty good, but dropped a place. And then the third round, I basically was like, I think if I like 5 every section, I'll be off the podium. And I 5'd every single section.
Oh, no.
Dang,
totally
you just put it in your
Could
head.
have had an
and,
X Games medal.
Dang, that would have. Is that the only year that was trials was in the X Games?
Yeah, so I think nobody had the foresight back then. The X Games were in Providence. Mountain bike, I think they were working with USA Cycling, and everybody had to have it like super natural mountain biking. And in foresight, they probably could have pushed to have an urban trials event, probably like an urban 4-cross or something, but they were trying to make it like, super natural, whatever. So they insisted on being at Mount Snow.
Sure.
And probably the production costs were just too high for the rating. So that's why it just went to half pipe skating, where things that you could just do in a much smaller environment, one TV crew, all that kind of stuff.
Damn, that would have been cool to have the only Trials X Games medal.
Yeah,
like,
it would have been
that
awesome. I do have the, they made us wear bibs.
That's
kind of
cool.
suck because you had to cover all your sponsors.
Yeah.
But I do have a Taco Bell bib from.
Damn, that's almost just
from
as
the Extreme
cool.
Games. Yeah.
Do you remember who won that?
Libor did.
Okay.
And then Hans got second, Mark Brooks got third, and I got fourth.
Damn.
Right off the podium.
That's crazy, dude.
Still got fourth though.
Yeah, it was good, but not a medal.
Yeah. Before we move too far from it, you said you were lucky that, you stumbled upon Schwinn and all this stuff. But right before, talking about, Xeroxing all these resumes and bugging Trek until they were about to, like, never talk to you again.
Yeah.
We've talked about it a bunch of times, but I think luck is persistence meeting opportunity. And you were persistent in, like, trying to find your footing in the sport that really didn't exist, right? Like, trials wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And I think you were too humble, and I think you killed it in a time that it was not ready for it, and you forged your path, which is so cool because, I mean, GoPros are readily available now. Oh, we have all this stuff, and like people say how hard it is. Like I can only imagine what it was like in the '90s forging that path. So I just want to give it up to you. That sounds like
thanks.
such a cool path that you did. So
Yeah, I appreciate it.
yeah,
A lot of hard work involved in that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man.
And then to keep going with the whole career thing, like Schwinn worked out then later on down the line because I started doing so many demos and there were so many opportunities with Schwinn to do lots of demos. And back then that was like a big part. Like there wasn't YouTube. So you did a live demonstration, which is crazy. Like, there's no...
That's wild.
Nowadays, like, you're both professional level riders, but, there's people on Instagram and YouTube that try shit 100 times and then put it on there and they might think that they're as good as YouTube.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of that goes into the riding and stuff. So I came into it from like, I could only represent what I could do for you right now live, first try. So then when it turned to social media, that's crazy. Like, trying to represent yourself against other people and stuff like that.
Yeah, because it almost like raises the bar quite a bit, like you're saying, because it's like people do have that opportunity to try 100 tries and they put the best one on the internet. Whereas like you were such a consistent rider, you still are a consistent rider because of all those years of demos and like, but yeah, when it comes to like Instagram now, it's like, it is kind of like, I don't know, it's hard to like watch some stuff for myself, honestly, because I know nobody's showing like the back end work.
Right.
They're just showing like the really cool one trick.
Yeah, so I might not do the best stuff, but what I could do, I could do.
But you're consistent, There's something to be said about consistency, like
yeah,
because like I have a bunch of BMX friends that are show riders, and like watching them ride a skate park is absolutely mind bending because they're
So
doing
gnarly.
like triple tail whips every show. So
Yeah.
like mid session they'll just do a triple tail whip, and you're just like, what?
crazy.
It's
Yeah.
it's insane, and like then seeing how far Instagram and Facebook and YouTube has pushed consistency as well is kind of wild as well. So kind of going back to Schwinn, where did that go from there? What came next?
Yes, that's what I was going to say. So I really developed like that demo program, and this was the one smart thing that I did. When I pitched Schwinn, I bought my own trailer and then paid to build out the setup and everything. Because there was a couple riders after me and stuff that would have Cannondale pay for it or Mongoose pay for it. And then when those programs folded, those guys were kind of screwed.
Because they had to like
Because
give back the assets.
They
and
had to give back
everything.
all the assets, and they also had people in-house booking all that stuff. And when I pitched it to Schwinn, I was trying to make it as small of an investment because I was the first person doing it. So I was like, if you just give me a dealer list, I'll hunt down all the places to do demos. I'll contact the reps, find out where to do it, and I'll buy the setup. But then I'll keep all the money from the shows.
Yeah,
So you're basically just paying to advertise on my stuff.
sure.
So it was a low investment for them, and if I did a lot of demos, I could make all the money. And
Wow.
then so my other friends that got into it a little bit later were more traditional show riders. You might
Sure.
get $100 a day or something.
Yeah,
But they're not putting any money on the line and they're not sticking their neck out. Where probably then I was getting maybe $500 a day, but it's a significant difference,
for sure.
So the good part was when Schwinn eventually went bankrupt in 2000, I had all the assets. And when Schwinn moved, they were such a big player in the bike industry that when they went bankrupt and like vacated all those retailers, everybody was trying to fill those spots. So then it was a perfect opportunity to go back to Trek or go back to Giant
Yep.
and hit them up again because they wanted to compete for that space on the floor and they wanted to have activations for dealers and stuff.
Yep.
So Giant was manufacturing all of Schwinn's bikes, so they were like a natural fit. So I was able to just go to them and say, here's my portfolio of what I've done for 5 years, and I could do the exact same thing because I booked everything. It wasn't like somebody was in-house or I don't know how to do it or I can figure it out. Like, I already knew how to do it. And I had a couple other smaller companies offer me a little bit more than Giant, but Giant had the most dealers. So I just figured that was the best bet because you're basically a touring band.
Yeah.
More venues to do demos at 500 or 700
That's
bucks a day,
brilliant. That's
the better.
brilliant. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, do you think that your degree in sports marketing really helped you like develop that program to go out and like start basically your own thing, or was that kind of just like, did that just kind of just happen? Like, how did that come to be? Like the concept of you buying all the stuff and like you touring on your own and like having the backing from Schwinn.
Probably the biggest thing like the college degree teaches you is just how to like make better Xerox resumes, and write better cover letters, and stuff like that. You know, just communicate a little bit better. The other thing is probably just hustle. You know, because I mean, you see kids that go to college now and they want to ride pro and they'll start a GoFundMe.
Yeah,
and that just blows my mind.
It is insane.
It's like, how about hustle somehow?
For sure.
So yeah, I think the biggest thing is like, I probably worked so hard because like I did have a degree and you don't want to blow it. Like you don't want to waste it on nothing. So that's why I always thought that was like, bike riding was fun. It won't last forever. But maybe if you have like a real job component, air quotes, you know, whatever, then you're kind of using your degree. So I don't know if it like practically helped so much as more as like just kind of like
in the
behind
back
the
of your
scenes
head,
influencing like, a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, so you signed, before we move on from Schwinn, in 95, right?
Yep. So 95 was just like a grassroots deal. 96 was my first year like that they were actually supporting me to ride full time. And then that lasted 96 through 2000.
And then you signed with Giant, and you had a hand in the STP, the bike I've ridden a ton, which is insane. Cool. Right? Yeah. How was that? That was your first bike that you had help designing, or how'd that work?
Right before Schwinn went bankrupt, we had prototypes of a kind of like an urban trials bike. Prior, you know, before anybody ever did that. I was going to have a signature model from Schwinn. They were doing like all the signature bikes for the BMX guys. 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙍 had one, Joey Garcia, Van Homan. Wow. I mean, the team that they had back then was insane. That was probably one of the best parts of riding for Schwinn was when they had all these big trade shows. Interbike, CABDA back then. We would do shows and it was like literally X Games gold medalists doing freestyle demos.
Dang,
and then I would do my trials demo like right alongside it. So you'd have Pat Miller, 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙍, Dave Asado, Andrew Ferris,
insane.
Chad DeGroot.
Was Brian Foster around at that time too, or
he wouldn't do the jump demos, but he was on Schwinn then.
Yeah.
So it was just like insane. Like you'd do a trials demo and you'd be in awe as they're like trying to do, you know, double tail whips back then.
Yeah. Those guys, like
crazy.
that was an era of BMX too where like those guys were rock stars.
Yes.
Like they were famous people. Like that's pretty freaking rad that you were like getting to hang out with them.
That was probably one of the coolest things about being on Schwinn. So I had since they were doing signature bikes for them, they were going to do a signature bike for me. It was going to be called the Hip Hop.
Hell yeah.
And we had all the graphics done. It had this little equalizer bar and hip hop and like this Atari font, and it was a really cool like kind of dirt jump trials bike. And then they went bankrupt, so it never came to fruition. So when I went to Giant, my first bike, you know, for the first couple months was a size medium XTC cross-country frame.
Of course, yeah.
And then I gave them that same exact drawing, and they just copied what I was going to do at Schwinn. And I had a couple, you know, prototype bikes for, I'm not really sure when we came out with the STP. It was probably maybe 5 years after riding for Giant or 4 years or something. Pump tracks are getting a little bit more popular, free ride and everything. So then we made that the STP, and it was pretty close to that bike, but people were still like kind of getting into free riding on hardtails a little bit back then. So the head tube was a little bit steeper slacker than I would have preferred, and kind of had to make a few concessions.
Yeah,
but it was pretty close to like what I wanted.
That's cool. Do you still have copies of the graphics from the hip hop?
I do.
Dude, I would love to see that at some point. That sounds so freaking cool.
Yeah, it was pretty sweet.
I also love the name because you're into hip hop, right? And then like
just like the double entendre.
Yeah,
you know, like
the correlation to hip hopping around on the trials bike. That's sick, dude.
So, there was a guy at Schwinn that would always call me hip hop because you just hop around and everything.
Oh, that's amazing.
What's up, hip hop?
So with all these demos that you were doing, was building video parts a big part of it back then? Like, how did that all work?
The video parts came in when I started for Giant. So I won that first national championship for trials in '93, which is like not like it's 19 years ago. Or is
30.
it- No, 29 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Holy shit. It's like when you see those memes and you're like 80 kids are turning 40.
Yeah, and you're just like, what? Yeah.
All right, so that was 30 years ago. I won that first national championship. And then from like 94, 95, 96, 97, I'd always be like second place, third place, because I never really focused so much on trials. I'd always want to go dirt jumping with my friends, or I would do the Vans Warp Tour, which was
Oh, yeah.
incredible.
That was an era
But
too.
You'd have all these guys from Pennsylvania that just are practicing on natural terrain all the time, and I'm doing all this other stuff and trying to do good, but not like never winning again. Like I'd win an event here and there, but I wasn't super consistent. So then in '99, I was like, I need to focus on trials. So it was probably like some of my least favorite riding times because I didn't like, I'd pass up going dirt jumping to practice trials and whatever. But in '99, I won the national championship again, and then I won it in 2000. And then Schwinn went bankrupt, and 2000 was the first year I filmed the New World Disorder part. And so that was kind of like the turning point. Like I got into a New World Disorder. I did do a self-produced trials video before that, but that was like the first exposure
big
to the bike
production.
industry, whatever. So then when I switched to Giant, I kind of realized like, you know what, I wasn't super stoked on riding trials every day. I won those two things. The only thing you could do at that point is not win again. And the videos were so much more fun and doing that. So then I just started doing filming for those videos.
Yeah,
So-
because the outreach as well and what you can do. Because if there's a magazine or what have you covering the national trials, that's one thing. But then you're looking at the videos and New World Disorder, especially the masses that saw those videos.
Yeah, that was a turning point where, like, for mountain bike if you were a trials guy, natural terrain was always the gold standard because it's just organic and so much harder and nothing square and straight or whatever. But for the videos, I just learned from that self-produced video, like you could do the hardest line on natural terrain and it doesn't look hard.
Yeah.
But if you hop over a handrail, it might be easier, but everybody knows how high a handrail is.
Yeah, everybody has that perspective.
Or if you jump down 5 stairs, everybody knows what 5 stairs is.
Yeah.
So a boulder in the trail that's off bumpy ground and weird running, it doesn't look hard.
Right.
So that's why we kind of started gravitating more towards urban trials. Ryan Leach and myself and Martin Ashton in England.
Oh,
and
my
Martin Hawes.
God. He's my favorite.
So we kind of invented sort of like the whole urban trials thing. And it was really just to make trials look as cool as possible for these free ride videos.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a video from Mountain Biking UK back then, and it was the Martins that did tricks and stunts.
Dirty tricks and cunning stunts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that was my favorite, and I used to geek out so much when I got to see them because they did demos as well around the UK, and they always had all the time in the world for the fans or whatnot to sign everything.
Oh,
and
that's sick.
those
dude.
guys, yeah, Martin Ashton and Hawes. And I've seen that Hawes might be kind of like getting back a little bit with his kid now, getting to the age of riding some trials. All right, that was my geek out moment.
I want to talk about one of the video parts. I think it's New World Disorder. It's one of the ones that's always stuck with me as being one of my favorite just bike intros. And I think I can't remember if it's Aaron Chase or not, but he's like, somebody's getting attacked with a Red Bull helmet on by like kids.
Oh, yeah.
And you're like sitting over there in the corner with like all these girls around you and you're like signing
Yeah.
them and stuff. Like, how did that come to be? Because that's epic, dude. It cracks me up.
So I think I filmed my first New World Disorder in 2000, and that's the year that I met Aaron Chase.
Okay.
Because there was also a pretty big East Coast video series, Chain Reaction.
Oh, yeah.
And Aaron was doing Chain Reaction. So I knew about Aaron and Kyle a bit from watching Chain Reaction. And Aaron always had like a sort of trials influence, street influence. So he rode a little bit of trials, but he started street riding more from like a downhill slalom perspective. And I started street riding from a trials perspective. So I was a little bit more technical. He was a little bit flowier. But I loved watching him ride because there wasn't a lot of people doing it back then. So I think it was 2000 at Mountain Snow I met him and started talking, and he was living in New Hampshire, and I was like, oh, it'd be so sweet to ride with you and whatever. So we started riding a little bit, and I was like, it'd be so sweet if you moved to New Jersey. So then he moved to New Jersey so that we could ride together all the time. And I think I might have filmed 2 more New World Disorders, and then now street riding was getting a little bit more popular. So I think Aaron got on Red Bull and he got a a New World Disorder part, and the first section was like a shared section. We went on a lot of filming trips together, and it just went from like me riding and doing like a manual to him riding and manual in the opposite direction. It was like a shared section.
Oh, that's cool.
And then the next year, since we were like kind of synonymous with always riding together, we did that intro, which
Dude,
was
it's so good.
at Whistler. Like,
I'll have to clip it into this video for YouTube because it like
it's super
dude,
funny.
it's so funny. Like I just remember, I think the first time I saw that was like 6 or 7 years ago, and I was just like, this is freaking hilarious. It was right after I had met you in Austin.
Okay.
And I looked up these videos and I was like, dude, this is amazing. And still to this day, it's just like, it's comical.
Have you ever seen that one?
No, I haven't.
Dude, it's amazing.
It was
just,
in the Whistler bike park, and so Aaron's like, you think he's getting like hassled by a bunch of kids,
They're, like, smacking him on the
and stuff
head.
like that. And then he looks over at me, and I never said a word to any of those girls or anything, but I guess they went to the Longhorn and
Oh
got
my
all
God.
these like hot waitresses to come over.
Yes.
And so he looks over at me, and I'm like autographing their leg and autographing their chest.
And it's just in the
like,
village somewhere.
Yeah, and he just looks like super chapped that like I'm getting all the attention.
It's so
and then it
good,
goes to
dude.
my part.
Yeah.
and that part's awesome.
And I'm
too.
like, it would be, it would be cool if there was a cooler story behind it, but there was no story behind
There's
it.
no story.
I don't know. Regardless,
theatrics.
it's hilarious and it's awesome, dude.
Well,
Yes.
going off tangent a little bit, how did you two meet? Because you guys have known each other a wee bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that story.
Yeah. So do you remember how we met?
So it was in Austin, right?
Yeah, down in Austin, Texas. So Jeff was down there with Giant doing a demo, and Oscar Blues had a beer festival called Oscar Blues Burning Can. And it was the first year they had just opened up a brewery in Austin, Texas. And it was the first year they were doing this event down in Austin. So everybody was all stoked. And was that your first event with Oscar Blues, or had you done one or two previous to that?
No, so I'll precede your part by a second.
Okay.
So I was at a Giant sales meeting, and I saw that Oscar Blues sponsored Nate Hills and Nico Mullally. And we were just like out to dinner one night, and I had just said to this one woman that did merchandising for Giant, I was like, it'd be like the best sponsor in the world, a beer sponsor. Like Oscar Blues sponsors people.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, I know Dale really well. And I'm like, you know Dale, like the Dale? She's like, yeah. She's like, I'll send an intro. So she sent an email to Dale and Chad, who was doing marketing at the time. And Chad responded, and Dale didn't for like a week or two. And I
Pretty
figured
standard.
like, oh, well, I guess that didn't go anywhere.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I like look at my email one day, and there's an email from Dale, and he's like, hey, big fan, let's talk. And I was like, holy shit, Dale knows who I am? Like, never in a million years would I ever think that.
That's sick.
So I got on the phone with him, and the thing that made sense was, since I did trials demos, and then we talked about the burning cans and how I could do demos at the burning cans, like do an activation, stuff like that, rather than just like a helmet or something, like actually do something.
Oh, yeah.
So then I go to Austin and meet Murph.
Yep. So we're like kind of hanging out. Like I briefly walked over there, and he's setting up his like booth. Like he had the trials trailer, and he's setting it all up. And I'm like talking. I'm like, man, I'm so excited to watch this. This is going to be so cool. And I was down there for Hot Box Roasters, the coffee company that I used to be a part of. And yeah, we're all like running around like madmen getting this event set up. And then all of a sudden, one of the people from Oscar Blues comes over, like freaking out, losing their mind. And they're like, hey, the bike guy, Jeff, he fell off his trailer, and I think he knocked himself out, and he broke his arm. And we're just like, okay, like, what do we need to do? And they're like, well, everybody's busy. We need somebody to take him to the hospital. And I'm like, well, I'm busy too. And my wife, Cheyenne, was there. And I was like, Cheyenne, take him to the hospital. And she's a very like introverted person. So she's just like, okay. And so she like runs over there, takes this guy to the hospital. And like, I remember while you guys were in the hospital, she was like texting me, and she's like, this guy has a Wikipedia page. Like, she was like losing it. Just like, he's famous. I was like, dude, I know. Like, it was kind of funny. Dude.
Yeah, so here's the crazy part. Murph and everybody from Oscar Blues came over because I had never done anything, and a lot of them never saw a trials demo. So I had just finished this 2-week demo program for the Sea Otter. So I would always go in phases. Like, sometimes I'd ride a lot of trials, sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes it's perfectly natural where I like wouldn't ride for a few weeks and I'd get on and be like totally off. But like, I just finished riding for 2 weeks at Sea Otter. I was feeling pretty dialed trials riding. So I'm like, hey, you guys want to see what trials is before the day starts? Because you'll probably all be working and I'll do my demos and you won't see it. So I pretty much did like a lot of the apparatus, the different stunts, but I didn't do the ender. So I used to drive around with a trailer, have all these different ramps and stuff on and off of it and whatever. And like the final move would be, I had like a 10-foot long, 8-inch wide balance beam that came off the 7-foot trailer, and then it was just a vertical drop. I did everything but that. So I was feeling pretty good, and then I think everybody left because the doors were going to open in 30 minutes or something. So I was just sitting there bored, and with trials, like, you can't practice stuff when you're competing at trials. So if you could walk it and see it, then you could ride it. So I had been riding a lot of trials, but I hadn't done that particular move probably since February. So I was like, let me just go stand up there and like look at it and whatever, see how it's going. Somehow I put that stuff together, but I forgot to bolt it to my trailer.
Oh, not a big deal.
So
Sure.
I walked out on it, went to do it the stability check, and it basically completely kicked out from under me, and I face planted from 7 feet up. So that's like the funny part of the story. Like, I went to I'm doing a demo at a beer festival. I smashed my face and break my wrist. Were you drunk? No.
Yeah.
Were you on your bike? No. Like, I wasn't even on my bike.
Just walking
And
around.
everybody from Oscar Blues is like, we just watched you ride.
Yeah.
And then you're like, all right, I'm going to hang out.
That was like the current.
And then 10 minutes later, I come over with my face completely smashed open and my wrist broken.
Oh,
And then the worst thing is, I'm like, my face is completely screwed. I'm
You're like, this is the
gonna
money
be
maker.
horrible for life. And then Cheyenne, who's like the sweetest girl, is driving me to the hospital, and she's like, well, don't worry, you're married. And I'm like, can't this cute girl be like, don't worry, you'll still be handsome? Something. Just like, it doesn't matter what you look like.
Oh, I
Punch
love
out,
it.
buddy.
That's
I'm like,
a pretty standard Cheyenne response.
not what I needed
honestly.
to hear right now.
Yeah, you're just like, damn it. But like, I think my favorite part of that day was like, you guys were at the hospital for like 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah.
You guys were there forever. And then like Cheyenne texted me, she's like, we're heading back now. And like the music was going at the festival. And like, this dude walks back up and he's like, all right, give me a Dale's. And
Yeah.
he's like, I didn't get any pain medicine. I'm just going to drink beer. And we were
Yeah.
just like, he's about
He's
this
one
life,
of us.
dude. And yeah, kind of crazy.
so that kind of leads us into obviously Reeb. Like,
Yeah.
and there's the big connection between Dale and Reeb, and then Oscar Blues and everything. How long were you on Giant? Like, what was that transition?
So I rode for Giant for 17 years.
Wow.
And it definitely was a good partnership for me, but I never really felt like, and it wasn't just me. They never were like a big marketing company, so I would always do a lot of cool stuff, and Specialized would blow up Bear Claw, or Cannondale would have Aaron Chase ads and all this stuff. I never really got any Giant ads or anything like that ever. 17 years. So when I first started, I would do a lot of demos, and then I started filming for the videos. And in the middle, I wasn't doing a ton of demos. And then towards like the last 3 or 4 years, Giant was really big on trying to open Giant retail partner stores. So they would get people to basically build out these stores to look like an Apple store, but for bikes,
Right.
And they weren't like mom and pop shops. They weren't people that had connections to the cycling community. It was usually like the guy who cashed out of Wall Street and wanted to open a bike shop. It's just a turnkey
Right.
thing. So they weren't shops that had a lot of local community connections and stuff. And I was the activation for all these grand openings. So every time they open a new store, it's like, send Jeff to do a demo in the parking lot. And it would be California one week, Texas the next week. So I couldn't even bring my trailer. So I was constantly like flying in. I'd go to Home Depot. I'd buy enough to make a couple boxes to do a demo, but it was kind of half-assed. It wasn't that great.
Yeah.
And the turnouts were never that great because they were always like new stores. It wasn't like if you two opened a store, like you'd have everybody in town.
Yeah, there's
that
like
had
no
known you
community
forever.
gravitating towards
Yeah,
it.
so basically you'd be doing all these demos for like the people who just opened the shop and like their friends.
Right.
Or their family, not even
Yeah.
their friends, because they didn't have like big connections. So that kind of started to like make me question, like, am I kind of like hanging on to this a little bit too long? Like, because you'd go and do these demos and not a ton of people. There weren't big mountain bike productions anymore and stuff like that. So I was kind of like sort of losing my sense of value a little bit,
Sure.
And then one day they just called me up and they're like, hey, we're not renewing your contract. And I was like totally shocked because I figured like, as long as you keep opening these stores, I have a job. And even though this job kind of sucks, it's a job.
Yeah, I'm still riding bikes.
But I was traveling so much, I would complain all the time. It was affecting a lot of my other sponsors because I couldn't do stuff for Shimano, or I couldn't do stuff for other partners because all I was doing was going to these Giant stores. And I started a YouTube channel, I think maybe a year or two before the Giant relationship ended. And like their whole opinion on the YouTube was like, that's for you, that's not for Giant. And I tried to explain to them like, this is creating demand for Giant. Like,
For sure.
let's get people to want to buy a Giant, not buy a Giant because like it's the only bike on the floor in the store.
Yeah.
So that was like the kind of the turning point where we started to like move in a different direction. I started doing a lot of stuff with Cand-Aid. I was at the first Cand-Aid bike donation, and they like literally bought Huffies
Wow.
and paid a ton of money for them. And I was like, I could get you a Giant, I'm sure, for what you're paying for this, and it's a much better bike. Talked to the guys from Giant. They had no interest in
Oh wow.
no interest at all. Not donating bikes, like just selling
Like,
bikes.
hey, we're going to buy these bikes.
So then that's like, all right, well, what are your goals? Like, I just felt myself going in a completely different direction. And in the last year, it was just like, I would go and do a big community ride the day before the demo. Like, I might go to Richmond, Virginia, and 30, 40 people would show up on the Friday night to do a ride, and everybody would have an awesome time. And I'd be like, that was great. See you at the show tomorrow. And they'd be like, oh, I got a kid's soccer game, or I want to go to ride with my friends, and you just start to see like people will come out and do something with an athlete, but they don't want to just go stand in a parking lot, especially with YouTube nowadays. Like, you're not doing anything in a parking lot on some boxes you built in a few hours that they can't see on YouTube. But if you ask them to come for a ride and have fun and whatever, they'll do that. But then Giant didn't want to do that. Like, they needed to have it at their retailer in their parking lot. And it just was like such a weird.
That's got to be hard
plan.
too, after like having that much experience and like, you know, kind of referencing back to your degree, and like you're looking at this massive conglomerate company and you're just like, why do you guys not understand what's going to sell more bikes to people who like you want to be riding your bikes?
Yeah. So they called me in October and said they weren't renewing my contract. And I was like, holy shit. You know, the way the bike industry works, like 5 or 6 years prior to that, I would have a bell contract and a clothing contract and whatever. And then, you know, Giant starts making helmets. So then they absorb that, and you're not getting paid back the same thing. And by the time I left Giant, I wasn't doing pay demos anymore. It was just all part of your contract. So like, you're not getting paid for demos. You're not getting paid for helmets, clothing, shoes. I think wheels at that point, you know. So you're all in. And so when that phone call comes in, you're like, I'm screwed. And I do all these demos and nobody comes. Like, I'm probably pretty screwed.
Wow.
So it was probably it is the best thing that's ever happened to me, because then I started reaching out to a lot of the big brands, because I just figured like, well, I need to do another big brand and talk to another big brand that's super popular. And I thought that would be like the best FU to Giant, and somebody that I thought was super cool brand. They are a super cool brand, but would have no interest in me, like with my self-value at that time. Right. And got a message back from like the marketing director. And he's like, huge fan, love to talk to you. I was like, holy shit, did not see that coming. And then talked to a few other brands. And then it's just like trying to put together a puzzle piece. Like, I got an offer from Pearl Izumi, which was awesome, and I was stoked on that. But then one of the brands made apparel, so then that was going to be a conflict. And it's like, all right, that Shimano's a big partner. One of the other really big brands, they don't spec Shimano. So then you're like, all these little roadblocks. And none of them, like, they were good validation, like, because I kind of needed
like,
that
I'm
a little
still
bit.
relevant, yeah.
But they all left me like, I'm going to kick the can down the street a little bit longer, because, you know, I figured I'd work for Giant someday. And then one day you're like, well, not working for Giant.
And for reference, what year was like the contract ending? Was that like 2016-ish or?
So this is my 4th year with Reeb, so probably 2018.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even though those were good for validation, they still felt very hollow, and you're just working for a brand that you're not really going to be invested in. So then I was going to ride for this one brand that didn't make a trials bike. So I hit up ProSice, and, you know, working with Cand-Aid and Reeb, I knew all the Reeb guys, but
right. So
really
let's sorry to cut you off, but yeah, Adam ProSice. He is, well, yeah, you want to describe who Adam is?
So Adam is our lead fabricator at Reeb and a shredder. So when I was making my Trail Boss videos, the first year Oscar Blues was sponsoring them, so I needed to do one in Lyons, I needed to do one in Asheville, and I needed to do one in Austin. So I went to Hall Ranch, and when I was researching it, I saw Adam doing the step up at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, who's this tall dude? He's awesome. And then I met him that summer and got along with the Reeb guys really awesome, but never really had that in mind because it's a really small brand, and just kind of thought economically that couldn't possibly work. So I thought like I needed to go for somebody the size of Giant for it to work. Right. And then Diana from Cand-Aids, so Giant dropped me, and they didn't announce anything, they didn't do anything. I made a YouTube video as like a proactive move, thanking them, because I was like, shit, I got to get ahead of this. I don't think I've ever told the story publicly, but I just got like straight dropped. Yeah. I made a video like to save face, like farewell Giant.
I remember that video,
no real
actually.
Plan.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. Like it got on the cover of Pink Bike, Vital, every single media outlet ever. Like I had no idea, because I was like, nobody gives a shit about Jeff Lenoski anymore. And I was like, holy shit. Like I didn't send it to them. They just picked up on it.
For sure. So
I think that really helped me get the eye of some of these companies as well, because it makes me look a little bit more relevant. And Diana's just sent like an email saying like, farewell Giant, hello Reeb. And I had asked Adam if he could make me a custom trials bike to ride for this other brand. And I was like, you know what, that would be the sickest thing ever, because I grew up skateboarding and BMX, and that's like as punk rock as it gets in my eyes.
Yeah.
But I can't see how that would make sense since it's such a small brand. And we got on the phone and started talking about how we could do things together. And they brought me on originally just as an athlete. And then in the first few phone conversations, it's like, all right, we got you as an athlete. Maybe we could reach out to somebody at Pink Bike, or maybe we could talk to somebody at Vital. And I'm like, well, I could just tell Spomer, or I could tell this guy. And they're like, I'm like, I'll help out with PR, you know? And then like, then I'd go into a store. So like, I started out just thinking I'd be an athlete, but it's so much more rewarding, because then, you know, help with product development and dealer relations, or set up some OE partnerships, and so much more than just an athlete. And you really feel like you're part of something. So when you ride for 25 years, and then you're just riding a bike that comes in a container from Taiwan, and you didn't design it, you didn't do anything, and you just ride it, versus now like you literally have input on every single component, color, geometry. Like it's literally the best thing ever.
Yeah, I was over at Reeb, maybe this is probably about 3-ish years ago, and I was doing a story on Reeb and photos and everything, and it was Sulfrane was still over there, Chris Sulfrane, who was the lead.
He was the guy who built the initial few bikes when Dale got his bike stolen, is how Reeb kind of started, and Dale was like, I'm gonna, like, his whole thing has always been like, fuck it, I'm gonna do it myself kind of thing. Right. So he approached Chris. He had a company called Generic Cycles, and Chris made like the first few like Oscar Blues frames. I don't even know if it was Reeb at the time. And then like it kind of came full circle, and then Chris came on to start Reeb.
Yeah, and Chris is no longer with Reeb, but still big part of the family and stuff. We rode bikes with him last night. And anyway, so I'm talking to Adam, and Chris's phone goes again, and Adam from across the shop, I bet it's Jeff, isn't it? And I think they were just like, because you were giving them so much input, and they were loving it, and it was a great deal of input on the geometry. And hey, can we tweak this?
When the Squeeb was coming along too?
It was the V3 Squeeb, if I remember correctly. And they just loved all the input and stuff. But yeah, they were getting into the finer details of all this geometry and working with you as much as possible, right?
Yeah, and it's awesome because Adam is such a good rider, but could not be night and day difference in abilities. So like we would push back on one another a little bit, and we really refined the geometry. I mean, the Squeeb is pretty much Adam, but I did like we offered an 130 millimeter travel version. That was totally me. Yeah, because like I wanted a bike that's a little bit more technical capable. So I did influence that, and Adam's such a good guy and so many creative ideas and stuff. So it's awesome to get to work with him on that stuff. And then, you know, I rode for them the first year, and I got the Ridiculous, which was the hardtail that they made, and had some ideas to refine it. And so they made me what is now the Ridiculous. And I just thought it was going to be a custom bike. And then I'd start posting pictures on Instagram, and people ask if it's available. Yeah. And within like 2 months, we just made it a model, and it's our #1 selling hardtail now.
Yeah.
So seeing stuff like that is pretty awesome.
Yeah,
it's
and
cool to have that validation too, like to be like, this idea is in my head and this should be a bike, and now it is a thing, and it rides insane too. It's such a good bike.
Yeah, and just to be on that ground floor, you know, because those guys over there at Reeb, as we all know, are just such good dudes, and the door's always open. So if you ever gone through Lyons, Colorado, I know this sounds like an advertisement for Reeb, but I ride one and I love those guys. But if you're ever in Lyons, Colorado, you can go in their shop, you can hang out with them, they'll bullshit with you and just offer you a beer, and you are part of the family then.
Yeah.
Like last night we did, there was a group ride that we went up to, and shoot, there was a lot of people.
It was an awesome turnout.
How many people showed up, do you think?
It had to be in the 40s or something like that, right?
Every bit of the 40s.
That's incredible.
And everybody from all across the spectrums, like really strong riders, people that were just having fun on a bike. They heard about this thing. There were single speeders out there, obviously full suspensions and everything in between. So it was so rad to see 15-year-olds out there all the way up to, I think there was like 60.
50-year-old, 1-year-old?
Yeah, well, there's 50 years old.
Just kidding.
But just
Didn't break a hip.
Really. Didn't break a hip.
Good.
Yeah, you guys were doing some pretty fun stuff out there on the rocks.
That's a fun place to ride.
Yeah.
So
cool
just riding for Reeb is awesome because like such a good community. You feel like you're part of something. It's almost like, I would assume like if you have like a Harley, you give somebody a thumbs up. Like when you see somebody on a trail with a Reeb, like you connect with that person. It's not just like a commodity.
Well, you
bike,
kind of just like know what kind of person they are from the jump. You see the bike and you're just like, cool, you're my kind of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the cool thing about the Reeb brand is it is very genuine, and like you're a genuine dude. So being able to mesh those two things together, because in the bike world, like especially in the world of like these massive companies, there's not a lot of like authenticity left. So it's cool to be able to like plug yourself into something like that and like actually add value to a cool brand.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing I noticed. Like when I started riding for Reeb, the brand was so good, but just small.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like how I said, everybody picked up the story that I left Giant. They all picked up that I went to Reeb. So that was a lot of people's first introduction to Reeb. But when you're representing a product that's has like a bulletproof quality reputation, like you're not selling anybody. You're just introducing them to the brand. The bikes sell themselves. All you have to do is make people aware of it. And so the number one comment was always like, those guys make awesome stuff, or I've never heard of them. But as a rider, that's like the two best things you could possibly hope. You know, once they see it, they'll see that's awesome product, or they already, know that it's an awesome product. But the brand awareness, going to Sedona Mountain Bike Festival, Vermont or whatever, and seeing like over 3-4 years now, like the first year people are like, what's a Reeb? And now they come like wanting to see the latest Reeb and stuff like that. That's pretty awesome, because when you ride for some of those bigger brands, like you have no idea like what your ROI is. Like I don't know if I'm selling bikes for
sure.
Schwinn or Giant, like you're gonna sell them regardless.
Yeah.
But with Reeb, like if you don't sell more bikes, then you're not pulling your weight.
Yeah.
But fortunately we did, so it's good.
But you go from corporate America pitching these ideas to, Giant, and they are hitting a roadblock.
Yeah.
And then you go, to the most core brand you could almost go to. How does that feel internally? I bet your day-to-day life has to be so much happier. At least I know I would be for me.
It's awesome, because when I recommend a Reeb to somebody or I represent it, I honestly 100% believe in it.
Yep.
And knowing that like you actually had say in the product, it's awesome.
Yeah.
So
it's something you can stand behind, actually.
100%.
And just hearing, like the fine details of designing the Squeeb or the SST, like they're actually listening, and you have this direct impact. You can see the bikes that you're selling. Like, I don't know, just it's such a feel-good story after, 18-year, relationship, which is kind of crazy in a sport with such high turnover.
Yeah.
Like,
it's
I see
pretty
it.
rare.
It's so rare. Like, I see it. I'm with Yeti for 8 years now, and I feel like that's an attorney. So thinking another decade, that is, I don't know, there was something, that solid foundation that you were bringing to the table that lasted almost 20 years. So is there anything crazy that you learned within that 20 years with Giant? Like, because I've never heard of a relationship that long.
I mean, I think Hans Ray
Yeah.
is longer, and Brian Leach.
Yeah.
It's weird that it's all trials guys.
Yeah.
Probably has a lot to do with like the fact that with trials you have to do a lot of self promotion.
Yeah.
And you have different avenues to, as a racer, like if you're not winning, then like, and when you're wired, you YouTube was a natural transition for me because I always did trials demos. It's always like figuring out like how can I get my riding in front of people. Nobody cared if you won a trials event. The trials event was only good if I would win a national championship, and then I'd go to a bike shop and try to get a demo. Winning the event didn't do anything. So I was always wired like, all right, well, you do something and then try to make it worth something. And if you're wired to like throw your leg over a bike, win a race, and then everybody else handles the media coverage, whatever, you might not be wired like that. Right. So maybe the reason the trials guys have the longer relationships because you're always trying to figure out a way to like make yourself valuable.
You're doing everything for yourself.
Yeah. And like, you know, I certainly couldn't win a trials event anymore, but I could still do cool shit. So you just figure out like what's my best path to like utilize my skills or whatever.
Here's a side tangent. Is there any like gnarly, scary moments in your career that stand out, and like how in the moment, because we're not talking, you know, you have 100 tries on Instagram, you're at a show and you have to do it that one time. Like how did you overcome the fear? Because I probably have a different way of doing it, Mike, you know, all of us. So is there any standout moments that you were like truly scared, and how did you overcome it?
So I was just talking about this the other day because I just did a ropes course last weekend with my kids, and my daughter does competition cheer, and my son and her boyfriend did like lacrosse and soccer. And I feel like there's a difference, maybe even as like a downhill or whatever, like you have to react to a course or as an enduro racer. You can't really plan your perfect enduro run. Yep. Like it's just constant reacting. And like with trials, you kind of like look at something. I could break down exactly what I need to do to get over that one obstacle and then the next one. So it's more like figuring out the game plan and then executing it and trying to block out like, you know, obviously the higher it is off the ground or something, it's like more risk, but it's just mental at that point. It's the same exact move. So you kind of get good at like figuring out how to like figure out what you need to do and then executing that thing. There's not a lot of reacting. When you're doing like trials or whatever, you're constantly like planning the next move. And that's actually hard because you never get into that real flow state. You have the ability to like get on one obstacle and then think of like, well, how could I screw this up? And then you do the next one. When you're doing an enduro race and the limited enduro racing I did, like you're just in it and you're in that flow state and you're done. There's no planning. There's no reacting. Probably the scariest stuff I've ever done is hitting jumps because I've always been a trials rider. I need to be in control. Hitting big jumps, like I'm not in control. There's a public jump line at Thunder Mountain in Massachusetts that, you know, it's designed to be ridden. I like to ride stuff that's not designed to be ridden. So it's not like it's any crazy accomplishment. Like it's designed to do what I did. But I rode that, I think, last time for the first time, and like I was literally ready to cry, like hitting that last jump.
That.
I was so
because that's a big jump. You made a video out there, right? I remember that.
And
that
it did really well
big.
because I think people were like so surprised that I like admitted that I was scared, but I was friggin' scared.
That's awesome.
You know, because you're riding at a jump, literally doing 30 miles an hour, and it's like 50 feet.
You're like,
that's
I
not
jump
in my
off
wheelhouse
of stuff.
at all.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And then it's funny because I think I did that right after 2 years ago, I climbed up Horse Thief's Bench in Fruta, which if you've ever mountain biked in Fruta, like I'd say 5% of the people ride down it. I've saw one trials rider go up it, but there was a bunch of cuts in the video. So I like had it in my mind for literally 11 years. I want to try to ride up that thing. So I tried like on a 26-inch giant 11, 12 years ago. Couldn't even come close when it was probably much easier. Tried like 4 years ago. Couldn't even come close. And then I got a ridiculous. That was probably like the reason I was able to do it.
You're like, I have to do
my
this.
signature bike.
Yeah.
I climbed up that thing, and I think I posted that video right around the same time as I did the jump video. Mm-hmm. And that's like something nobody in the world has ever done, and I don't even want to ever try it again because I couldn't do it, and I'd be pissed if I couldn't do it. So I like, it's the one thing I just did and leave it. And the jump video, that's like a trail that's designed to be ridden, I didn't do anything special, got like literally 20 times more.
No way. Which is kind of mind-blowing to me because if you haven't seen Horse Thief's Bench, I'll link the video in here, and if you're cool with it, I'll put a little snippet in the video too, because like riding down that is a task. Like you said, it's probably less than 5% of people that can clean that thing all the way down. It is gnarly. And then when you're walking up it with your bike, like you have to put your bike on your shoulder, and like 9 times out of 10 you're like passing your bike up to the next dude on the rock because it's so burly. So the fact that like you posted that and then this other video like
people would be like, oh, it's amazing you did that jump line. I'm like, but that's what you're supposed to do.
But look at this.
So those that don't know, that trail is in Fruita, Colorado.
Yep.
So yeah, it's been a while. I was thinking,
It's
right as you said
insane.
that, I was like, how did you get up
Yeah.
that?
Well, the thing is, like, for any good trials rider, there's nothing on there that's like impossible or
Yeah.
super hard. It's more like you could throw a bullseye on a dartboard, but can you do 10 in a row?
For sure.
And I'm the idiot that'll sit there all day till I hit it 10 times in a row.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and
so it's
that
just
trail's tough too, especially the last few years. You know, it's getting more and more ridden, more and more weathered, and it's like dusty out there. Like some of those slab rocks are super slippery to like go down. So I can't imagine like trying to hop up that and like hoping that you grip and like continue to do that.
Yeah, and then as you get closer to the top, then it's the stress of like, I don't want to make it all the way up here and screw up.
For
Because I don't
sure.
want to go back to the bottom and have to do it again.
Yeah, because like once you get closer to the top, those steps get a little less gnarly. But I could see that you let your guard down for just a second and you just
Yeah.
dab a foot and you're just like, well, I'm going to throw my bike off this cliff now.
Yeah.
I'll meet it at the bottom.
Yeah.
Do you think, going back to what you said with the jump video going 20 times more, do you think that that's something about the relatability of the video with regards to you like expressing yourself and being open?
I think it was 100% the relatability,
Yeah.
for sure. Like, because I just shared that I was scared,
Yeah.
Right.
you know, and people would expect you to just play it off like it's no big deal, but it was a big deal. I wasn't too proud to admit that it was a big deal.
Yeah, well, and I think that that's something about YouTube videos over these like 100 times and only showing the best one on Instagram thing is that it allows people to see the real athlete, to actually get, you open the doors to yourself, right? And you let people in because you've got this 5-10 minute video that you can really express what you're going through. So it does open. Do you like one side of the social media movement more than the other, like YouTube over Instagram? Do you even have a TikTok?
I don't have a TikTok.
Oh,
I
come
like
on,
YouTube.
man.
I like YouTube the most
Yeah.
because I feel like it, you know, it's like a podcast.
Yeah.
It's not a 10-minute conversation. You could really get into a little bit more. And I think when I go to events, I'd say if I go to an event and there's 10 riders that came to ride with me, I'd say 8 of them are YouTube subscribers versus
Right.
Instagram. Like it's a very good core audience. It's somebody that you engage with. You know, you start commenting and you know, you see it's a lot of the same people. And it's super rewarding. Like when you meet a 15-year-old kid or like literally a 50-year-old guy and he's like, oh, I learned to wheelie from your video.
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Whereas, you know, Instagram sometimes like it's very self-serving.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're just always trying to like post the next coolest thing. And, you know, you don't, I don't know. It,
And
like,
you're trying to post it at the right time
Yeah.
of day and get your hashtags right and all this kind of stuff.
Instagram is
yeah.
one of those things where it does feel like you're more or less like kind of keeping up with the Joneses. Like you're trying to post the gnarly clip or the gnarly content. And
Yeah.
like whereas YouTube, like you can really truly be yourself because you do have that longer format to like tell a story or like explain a tutorial or whatever.
yeah, I mean, it's all showing off at the end of the day, regardless.
Yeah.
even,
Right.
even YouTube. But like, I feel like you could teach a little bit more on YouTube or, I don't know. It
Yeah.
just
Opens
seems
up the
to-
audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The people are more committed to it. You know,
Yeah.
Instagram, it's like turning
It's-
into TikTok. Yeah, exactly. You're just swiping up. Whereas YouTube, they stop and watch you for 10, 15 minutes and really engage with it and open that dialogue, like you're saying, which is, never really thought about that. That is a cool way to, makes me want to like start a YouTube.
Yeah. Talking about YouTube, I kind of want to jump back into like these film projects you did, like the New World Disorders and stuff like that. Do you have one of those projects that's like your all-time favorite?
I would say probably the last New World Disorder that I filmed for, which was 8.
Okay.
Because prior to that, the first few New World Disorders we filmed with, the level of riding was such that like I could go to Amsterdam for 5 days and knock out a segment.
Okay.
I've never been there. I just ride around town and what you could find and do is good enough, you know? So the first few videos we'd go to, I think the first one I ever did was New York because I didn't really have any reason for them to put any real effort into to me. But then like after that one did good, we'd go to like Amsterdam or we went to Cologne, Germany, stuff like that. But then the level of riding started to get quite a bit higher. And then it started to get to like, you know, I think number 6, number 7, number 8, we'd go to Vancouver and there'd be like the aquarium and it'd always be like, well, it would be sick to wall ride that if there was a better run or if there was a ramp. But it was prior to that, it was always like you just ride it as it lied. And if you couldn't do it, you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I think 7, we'd be like, well, why not build a ramp and do a huge wall ride over that door? And we would do that, you know. And I think I filmed a Chain Reaction 5 that I won a Bike Magazine video award for, or Best Urban Assault for, kind of with the same logic, doing a lot more building to make things possible to, kind of just ramp up urban trials a little bit. So that last New World Disorder, I think Danny might have came out with his first video around that same time. And, you started to see that you're competing against like videos and stuff like that on YouTube where you could spend a whole year riding, and I have 1 week to film a part. And I really got to make the best bet because nobody watching it knows that I had a week and somebody else had a year or whatever. And we were literally shooting it on film too.
Wow.
So there were times where like I would try something and they'd take a whole roll of film out of the thing and just throw it in the garbage.
No way.
Yeah. I
And
heard
that
some
was
of these,
stressful too.
Yeah,
Like,
I've worked alongside Freeride Entertainment, and they've got some of those stories about how many times that somebody didn't land something and it was all on film, and Derek Westerland's like calling the videographer, filmers like, what the fuck is going on? Like, we need to stop spending money, basically.
That's crazy,
Yeah.
dude. Damn.
And then I think somebody said once it was like $1 or $10 a minute or $100 a minute or something. And then, you're trying to do technical stuff that takes a bunch of tries. And then you could hear the camera too. So like I'm trying to ride down a handrail and you hear the thing and I'm just imagining money burning.
Oh,
and
no.
you're like, dude, get this thing right. And
it's like in your head so heavy.
totally.
Oh, man. That's crazy.
Yeah, so that last New World Disorder I shot around New Jersey intentionally because I had like a bunch of tricks that I wanted to try to do that I think were like firsts for the time. Like I had a riding area in my backyard with a sub rail, and I like nose picked over to bar spin out, and I did a backflip on the street,
Dude,
like
that
up to a
backflip
loading
clip
dock.
is so gnarly.
I never tail whipped in a video. I built a thing to tail whip. I just wanted to like check off all these boxes. So like I had a whole list of things I wanted to do, and it was all like in New Jersey and New York where I could like scout ahead of time. And after I filmed that video, I figured like I don't know what I'm gonna do better than that.
Yeah.
And I don't have the time to invest into that again. So like the last video, I just told Derek like I think I'm good. Give it to Adam Houck, if you know Adam Houck.
Oh,
yeah.
He was like getting little parts in New World and whatever, and I was like, I don't know if I could top that, and I'm just gonna give it to
But that's
to
sick.
the new dudes.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
you check those boxes and
Pass
then you
the
pass
baton.
the torch,
I
pass
love
the
that.
baton, to the
And that,
next
like,
generation.
I mean, that part is sick because, I mean, all those parts that you put out, I think are really cool. And they're so different than a lot of even modern trials parts because you are, like, mixing, like, the trials plus, like, the BMX style.
I always had a huge BMX influence, but I always tried not to do BMX on a mountain bike.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally.
Like I'd always try to maybe ride a handrail to bar spin out, or
For
like
sure.
not just do what you could do on a BMX. Because I always figured like, well, if you could do it on a BMX, why are you doing it on a mountain bike?
Totally. Yeah.
Or like obviously there's going to be a clip that's. I always try to like
Yeah,
use
you-
a mountain bike for something.
You
Yeah,
could
yeah,
just
yeah.
kind of see that influence. So, like, just the way you'd, like, bar spin in the street and stuff. Like, that just, like, is, like, that, like, so, like, BMX-y to me. I think it's, like, the coolest thing.
And that was my favorite trick because that's like the complete opposite of trials. Like trials, you're death gripped on the handlebars,
Uh-huh.
both fingers on both brakes. So the idea of like letting go, that was like so weird for me.
That's
That it
sick.
just became like my favorite move.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you kind of touched on, like, you know, towards the end of filming, like, really cool stuff. You said, like, you know, you started to compete with, like, Danny and stuff like that, Danny McCaskill. Is it crazy to you to think that you've really influenced, like, him and, like, Fabio Widmer, like, those projects that are coming out now that are mind-blowing? You know, it's a year or two in the making, and, like, the production value is so freaking high, but, like, you know, the stuff you were doing 15, 20 years ago, like, really did influence that. So, like, is
It's-
that crazy to think about?
Yeah, it's crazy to think that you're a cog in the wheel. Like, you know, it was a Hans Ray video, then maybe Ryan Leach or myself, and then now Danny and Fabio, like to just see that progression. And I guess it's just like, you know, when somebody starts, when I first started mountain biking, like I thought a tail whip was impossible on a mountain bike. And like any kid that starts mountain biking now, like that's just what you do.
Yeah,
Like
that's
it's not,
that's the
that
second
mental
trick you
barrier is
learn.
overcome. So
Yep.
it's not there anymore. So I think that's like cool that you just set the bar so that when somebody then learns about the sport, they're just like, oh yeah, of course you ride trials and you bar spin and
Yeah.
you hop on your back tire. Like it's no big deal.
Yeah, that's so
Where
cool.
that was unfathomable, like when I started.
Yeah.
And now somebody's watching Danny or Fabio now that will just think that's natural and
Right,
take it
yeah,
to the next
that's it,
level. It's
yeah.
just
That's like
all
the
part of the.
as much as, like, sometimes I hate the internet, in like the bike world. Like I love it for that reason, because you, like you said, it like sets that bar, and it's so accessible now to where like when you're growing up doing this, like you had a magazine or like a VHS maybe,
Yeah.
you know, but like for the most part, like you're kind of just figuring it out on your own.
Yeah.
And like you're riding around with your friends. Whereas now, like a kid can go to the store and buy a bike and get on Instagram and see the gnarliest trick in the world that just happened 5 minutes ago and be like, oh, yeah, I can figure that out.
Yeah. Seeing things is like such a big part of it. Like when I first started riding trials, it was watching the guys and then trying to imitate it. But then for a year or two, I would ride pretty much by myself, and you wouldn't really progress as fast as you can. And then I had two friends, one that I still put in a lot of my trials videos, or my videos now, Lance, and another friend, Chris. And when we started riding together, like you both might try something 10, 20 times or whatever. And then the second somebody does it, next try the other person does it. Like, you just have to see it. And then once
You
you
just
see
have to
it,
believe that it's a real
yeah,
thing.
once you
Yeah.
see it, so it's just kind of the same thing. Like you see something on Instagram and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's possible.
Yep.
But that's also weird. Like I suck at tabletops. I've always sucked at tabletops. And I was in Florida last year and I found this good hip and I was like, you know what? I'm actually going to practice a trick. I haven't practiced a trick in a long
Oh,
time.
I love that.
I was like practicing tabletops, and then and Lance is there. I'm like, hey, get a shot with your iPhone or whatever. And I'm like doing a table, and I was like, that one doesn't look half bad. And within like 5 minutes, I posted on Instagram. And then I think back to like 10 years ago filming for those New World Disorder parts. Like I would practice in the street, bar spins for like weeks and weeks and weeks, and then be like, all right, in a year, somebody will see this.
Yeah,
and now
that's
it's like
crazy. It's
I
instant.
did my first tabletop that's remotely
Oh my
respectable. Let me put it on Instagram.
You should have made a video about
know?
it. Learning tabletops at 50, dude.
Yeah, it's like so crazy.
that's
Just how
amazing.
different it's changed.
Yeah,
It's
that's
such a, and then you'd go to Interbike and you wouldn't even, like, everybody would film you. You'd have an idea of what it looked like. And somebody else would edit it, and you'd be in a premiere with like hundreds or thousands of people, and like you'd watch it for the first time. And we're usually so drunk that we'd
yeah.
have to go to the Maxis booth the next day to watch it, to be like,
okay,
was it as good as I thought
yeah,
it
was my part that good? Because everybody's probably there hyping you up
Yeah.
and like feeling the stoke. And if you're drunk, you're just like, yeah.
Yeah. And then, they might leave out something you thought was cool. Or
Yeah.
put in the one that you thought was whack, not the good one. And now, like, you film it yourself, and I edit it myself, and it's like, don't put that one in, put that one in.
Yeah.
That's
Just
a
so
crazy
different.
perspective to have, even just like if somebody else films your video and edits it for you, like they can send you a link and be like, hey, what do you think of this now?
Totally.
Like back then it was like probably film on a computer, like just like how crazy it was then to like have to cut a video and like then you don't get to see it till it's done.
Yeah.
That's insane.
So with all of that, so we've got your YouTube stuff going, obviously PR and somewhat a face of Reeb. Where do you see the next couple of years going?
I've started doing a lot of coaching, and I really like that. So
Yeah.
I started out riding trials, and trials is all technique, really. Like you could not even be a good bike rider and be a good trials rider if you
Oh,
have
for
good
sure.
technique. I have some friends like 𝙎𝘾𝘼𝙍𝙬 or Lance that are amazing trials riders, amazing bike riders, but being a good trials rider doesn't necessarily mean you're a good bike rider,
Right.
but you always have to study technique. So I've always kind of been into that. And then the one thing that somebody pointed out recently when they wrote a bio for me. So my major was sports marketing, but I have a minor in movement and sports studies, kinesiology, anatomy, and all that. And it never even dawned on me, because as I started to get into more coaching, like Ryan Leach and a few other people, we didn't get certified or whatever. That's like a big thing in coaching, whatever sport,
Sure.
whether you get certified. And I decided not to get certified because I agree with some things, and I am a fan. I watch all that stuff and learn like to learn the language and the vernacular of how to teach things and psychology, but I don't necessarily subscribe to like how some people teach how to do certain things on bikes. So there could be a guy off the street who has a higher level certification. If I don't have that, then to some cyclists, they might think that they're more qualified than me.
Oh, right.
So I was just like, I'm not even going to get certified. I'm going to do the Trail Boss Academy standard.
Yes.
Just make my own standard, which
I
is what a
love
few
it.
of my friends have done as well. But I forget why I even got in that wormhole. But so I've been getting into more coaching and stuff like that. And it's super rewarding, like being able to work with riders and seeing them progress in like a couple weeks or a session or a weekend or whatever, and being able to pass down that knowledge. It's really, really awesome. So I'm trying to like build out that business a little bit and maybe get a few people that use that same, teaching system or whatever.
Right.
Because it's cool to like pass down.
Would that be in your perfect world? Is that going to be like a touring program, or are you going to be basing it out in New Jersey? Or
right now, I like have been touring around, but I haven't been doing a ton. I've done maybe like one a month or one every couple months, and they're small groups and stuff like that. But ideally, it'd be cool to get a couple coaches working with me,
right?
And then we could kind of expand it from there.
And is it mostly just trail riding? Is it trials? What do you coach?
Trail riding.
Okay,
yeah,
sweet.
All trail riding. A lot of fundamentals and stuff like that, and just trying to get like, I like to do a couple sessions where you just go over all the fundamentals, so that then my favorite thing to do is get on the trail.
Yeah.
But it's hard to teach somebody certain wheel lifts or something on the trail, so you just do it in a controlled environment. So then when you're on the trail, then you could resort back to like what you taught them, and it helps them learn a lot quicker.
You have to break it down when fear's not involved. You get them out on the trails, you get rocks, you got stumps.
Yep.
They go back to what's comfortable. And what's
Exactly.
comfortable is not usually right sometimes. So yeah, break it down. Concrete in a nice parking lot, get it, that muscle memory going.
Yeah.
Then they'll just do it out, on the trail.
Yeah, which is exactly what I said I wouldn't do when I decided I wanted to get into coaching.
Yep.
And then I did a couple sessions and realized how valuable that is, because again, you could get the reps in and you could learn the fundamentals, and then you take them to the trail, and it's a lot easier to apply.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, you don't want to be practicing things when you're scared, because then you don't have good technique or whatever. You always want to try practice when you're like in a comfortable mindset.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is this project under the Trail Boss name?
Oh yeah, I guess that's how I got off on that tangent. So because I rode trials and I was always focused on technique, and then I started doing the Trail Boss stuff, and when I started that YouTube channel, originally it was because I was talking to the guys at Pink Bike about doing some kind of video series, and because of the reason I said, like, I made that last New World Disorder, I was thinking maybe I'd do like some kind of series where it was street riding or trials riding or whatever. And if you've ever filmed a video part, like you always feel like you left something on the table.
Right.
Fortunately, that one New World Disorder, I kind of
got everything,
but like every video, you're always like, I could have done something extra.
Yep.
So then I started to think like, if I do this video series for Pink Bike, like, am I going to be trying to do crazy shit every 2 months or something again, trying to keep up with all these guys? And like, then you're like, I just need one more bar spin, one more or something, and I went through a little enduro racing stage for a little bit, and I did decent regionally. So, and then I would do like some photo shoots for Fox and stuff like that. So like people started to know that I mountain biked a little bit more. So then when I started to go do those trials demos, I had a little bit more of a reputation of not just being a trials rider. Even though I always mountain biked, I just didn't have that public persona.
Oh, yeah,
People would know that I raced a little bit or see me in a Fox ad mountain biking. So then it started to become this common narrative. Like I'd go to Indianapolis or Colorado, and people would be like, I got the trail for you. Like, I've never seen anybody clean
they're
this one.
trying to challenge you.
So that's when the light bulb went off, and I was like, you know what? If I try to ride some of those trails, there's a start and a finish, and there's no, like, I should have done more. Like, if you ride the trail, that's the story. So the first trail that I ever did for Trail Boss was in Indianapolis, because I kept going to Indianapolis 3 years in a row, and this lady there would say, I know this trail, it's impossible to ride. And I was the mountain bike elitist, so I'm like, how hard could it be? It's Indianapolis, like, can't be that hard. So I had to do this this product ride with a magazine editor or a website editor, and he lived close to that place. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to come out there and let's try to ride that place. And I went there, and it rained, and it was the slickest, most technical trail I've ever seen. And I was like, holy shit, she was right. So then I went back a couple weeks later and filmed that one. So that was the first Trail Boss episode I ever had. It was in Indianapolis. And then like, so then Oscar Blues came on as a sponsor. So it's like, what's the hardest trail in Austin? Like, and people would say Emma Long. And then Farlow Gap and Pisgah, try to clean that whole thing, all the climbs and everything, and climb Hall Ranch or whatever. So that was the idea when I first started it, just like a video every 2 months or whatever.
Sure.
And then YouTube, you got to feed the machine all the time.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So then it would start to be like some more ride along things or riding with your friends. And then you start to run out of those signature trails, because for the real technical stuff, again, like if I ride Farlow Gap and you have 100 people comment like, I've never cleaned that that Rudy climb or Hall Ranch, like the more people that ride it, they sell it for you. If I build a technical trail in my backyard, everybody's going to watch it and be like, I could do that 1 second.
Cool, yeah.
But you need people to back it up. So I started to run out of those the signature trails that are like heavily trafficked, and I wanted to do more stuff. And then I always had an appreciation for like the techniques, and I started doing some how-tos, and then people really liked the how-tos, and then that got into the coaching stuff. Because again, having the trials background, like I like to use my YouTube channel to then go to festivals and get people to actually ride. I still love, like, even though it's a group ride, last night at Hall Ranch, you find something to session, and it's like a trials demo or something. Like,
yeah, and everybody stood around with their camera or their phones out, filming it and all, and it was impressive.
Yeah, so you ride for 5 minutes, and then everybody rides.
Well, and there's something like that too. That's almost like being out riding bikes with all your best friends when you're a kid, right? Because everybody's just hanging out, you're sessioning a thing. There's a bunch of people there, and everybody's laughing and having fun. Like,
and it's
so
awesome.
much value in that.
Yeah, it's awesome when everybody finds something to try. Like, some people might try a harder line, some people might try an easier one, but everybody's out there challenging themselves, and it makes those rides more fun because it's not just like a hammer ride.
Yep.
You're stopping a lot. And then the coaching, it's like interacting with people and stuff like that. So I think that all goes back to like the demos.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow, how'd the Trail Boss name come to be? Was it Trail Boss from the beginning, or did you kind of like mull around a few different names?
So the idea was to ride those trails and whatever. So I wanted to name it Trail Tamer. It would have been
okay.
I feel like you need like a spin-off of that.
Yeah, and one of the guys from Giant suggested Trail Boss, and I was like, that sounds douchey. And Robbie Morales is the Trail Boss, There's BMX bikes, so I just didn't really feel right about it. And then I was like, I kind of wrote like a little description, like, because the whole point of it was like to ride these trails and like, give the intel of how to clean these trails. So I was like, with the proper intel, anybody could be a trail boss, but if you mess up, like, Mother Nature will remind you who's really in charge. So it wasn't like I was trying to be the trail boss. The guys from Giant proposed it, so I thought it sounded catchy, and once I like kind of spun it in my head to that perspective, then I felt a little less douchey.
Yeah.
But then it's like you build 1,000 bridges and nobody will call you a bridge builder, but you film one Trail Boss video. I can't ride 5 feet down the trail now without somebody be like, "What's up, Trail Boss?"
I love it.
I don't even think like half the people at festivals know my name.
Yeah, they just call you Trail Boss.
Boss.
That's amazing, dude.
It's kind of funny.
It's a good brand.
Yeah, and it is cool to see how far that project for you has come, like to hear like what it's turning into now. Like, it's really rad. So yeah, congratulations on that.
Yeah,
that's
thanks.
sick, man. Well, I guess we can kind of get into the point of wrapping this up. We've been sitting here for an hour and a half talking about all kinds of rad things. Before we do you have any projects that you're working on right now that you want to talk about, or is it just kind of like moving on to the coaching stuff? Is that like the big focus right now?
Yeah, so the big focus for me is going to different mountain bike festivals for Reeb and just trying to put together big group rides. And my next one, probably by the time this comes out, it would be the Flow State Mountain Bike Festival at the end of July.
Sweet.
Put on by Mountain Flyer. But I like to go to that, or whatever the big mountain bike festivals are, and try to get as many people together and go out on the trail, have a good time, try to share a little bit of knowledge and stuff like that. So that's a big thing. And if you follow any of my social media, you could usually keep abreast of that schedule. And then the coaching.
Sweet,
the coaching.
awesome.
It's called Trail Boss Academy.
I love it, dude.
Seemed like it had a pretty good
Oh, it's such a good ring.
to it.
Yeah.
It's so cool. And you have the credential from the YouTube channel because you have tamed the trails, and like you have this credential from all the demos, like being able to now pass, like we've said, the torch along to other people who are coming up the ranks. That's so freaking cool.
There's nothing cooler. Like last week I coached an 8-year-old kid and I coached a 60-year-old dude and a few other people in the middle, but like to just see that light bulb go off in their heads.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, because it's kind of all relative, right? But like when people get stuff, it's just like that is a rewarding feeling because like you remember learning and unlocking certain things, and then having somebody being able to like walk you through those difficult moments is like, that's a game changer.
Yeah. And I know that you and Sean could relate. Like when you've done something so long, it's probably really hard for you to get that feeling like you really had a breakthrough.
Yep.
The gains are so small.
Yep.
And like when you ride as long as we have, it actually for me, if I could do the same, I'm happy.
Yeah.
If I could do 1% better, but like you could work with a 8-year-old kid or a 6-year-old guy and like teach him how to do a drop and go from like literally not being able to do a drop to safely do like a 3-foot drop or 4-foot drop in a few hours. And it's like the light bulb goes off in their head. And it would be impossible for me to get that feeling anymore.
Yeah.
Like,
When
I
it's
don't know
like
what the hell,
you
unless
almost
I did like a triple backflip or something.
yeah, but you almost
I'm not
get
getting
that
the
same
but
feeling from
exactly.
them, right?
You
Like
feel it for them.
yeah,
So being able to pass on that stoke is awesome.
yeah, that's so freaking rad.
Yeah.
And then yeah, anybody you'd like to give a shout out to?
Obviously, Reeb, it's been awesome working with them for the past 4 years, and we have a lot of plans in the next year or so. So hopefully we're going to be growing that brand and just all my sponsors that support me.
Hell yeah, man. That's super cool. And last but not least, for anybody that is listening, do you have any motivating words or things to leave people with before we sign off?
I guess, just to never give up on what you're trying to do. That's always been a mentality for the type of riding that I do, since it's low risk a lot of times, or not necessarily but like if you're a free rider, rampage rider, you're hucking off a cliff and there's one chance you either do or die.
Yep.
I like to always try to like solve the puzzle and break down stuff. And a lot of times it takes a lot of tenacity. So you have to like try and try and try. And sometimes that trying gets to the point where like once you finally do something, you're not even happy that you did it. You're just glad that you could stop. But if you give up, you're never gonna get there. So, just don't give up.
I love it, man. That's
And I
amazing.
think that's kind of like the overarching thing for you. Sign out all those Xerox resume. Like you just like you do it. You're
It all
like, this
comes
is gonna
full
happen,
circle.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
I will keep sending out Xerox resumes.
dude, I love that.
I love it, dude. Well, yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for coming to hang out. We'll make sure we get you some coffee to leave with.
Awesome.
And yeah, I'm stoked to go ride bikes with you later.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Hell yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Cool.
All right,
All right,
guys.
thanks.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool, guys. Well, thanks for listening and keep being scared normal. We'll catch you next time. Later.